I'm Alex Papadovassilakis, Insight Crime's lead investigator for Central America. Today, I'm going to read a story we recently published on the Trump administration's controversial decision to deport hundreds of Venezuelan citizens to a notorious gang prison in El Salvador. Alongside more than 200 Venezuelans flown to El Salvador on March 15th, was a notorious leader of Salvadoran street gang, the MS13, who was jailed and awaiting trial in the United States. That leader, César Humberto López Larios, alias Greñas, was one of 14 members of the MS13's historic leadership ring, who US prosecutors had spent years chasing in a criminal case the Justice Department called the highest reaching and most sweeping indictment to ever target the gang. So why, all of a sudden, was the Trump administration happy to let Greñas go? And what could it mean for the United States' long-standing fight against transnational gangs? Here's the full story. Could US deportations compromise the Trump administration's MS13 crackdown? Read by me, Alex Papadovassilakis. The Trump administration's decision to return a high-profile gang boss facing terrorism charges to El Salvador, part of a controversial effort to deport hundreds of Venezuelan citizens, could signal the US government's willingness to compromise its long-standing MS13 crackdown in favor of mass deportation. César Humberto López Larios, alias Greñas, a veteran leader of the MS13 street gang, was flown to El Salvador on March 15th alongside other suspected Salvadoran gang members and more than 200 Venezuelans accused by US officials of belonging to a gang known as the Tren de Aragua. López Larios was among a group of 14 members of the MS13's historic leadership ring charged with terrorism in a landmark case initiated during Trump's first administration. At the time, authorities called it the highest reaching and most sweeping indictment to ever target the gang. The expulsion flights began after the Trump administration invoked an obscure wartime law from the 18th century to loosen restrictions on deporting suspected members of the Venezuelan gang, which was recently declared a terrorist organization by the US State Department alongside the MS-13 and several Mexican crime groups. The El Salvador government has agreed to house the deported Venezuelans in a maximum security prison for a reported fee of $6 million, despite the US authorities' own admission that they have no clear evidence of their gang affiliation. The trade also included the return of López Larios and 22 alleged members of the MS-13 wanted by Salvadoran authorities. The move came after Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele publicly offered to house convicted criminals from the United States in return for a fee. In private, he also requested the Trump administration return top MS-13 leaders to El Salvador as part of the exchange, according to the Salvadoran ambassador to the United States. A video posted by Bukele showed a shackled López Larios being dragged off an airplane and bundled into an armored vehicle by Salvadoran security forces. A hefty security convoy transported the suspected MS-13 members and the Venezuelan nationals to the Terrorist Confinement Center, a maximum security prison built to house Salvadoran gang members. Removing López Larios from US soil required the Justice Department to drop the terrorism-related charges against the gang leader. Prosecutors cited geopolitical and national security concerns as justification for doing so. A seasoned gang boss, López Larios was previously deported from the United States to El Salvador in 2017. He later escaped prison there and fled to Mexico, where he joined the MS-13's operations on Mexican soil. Authorities arrested him again in Chiapas in June 2024 and transferred him to US custody. US authorities have hounded fugitive MS-13 leaders since the government announced their indictment during the first Trump administration. This included the formation of a joint task force in 2019 between the Justice Department and the FBI. The unit was charged with disrupting, dismantling, and ultimately destroying the MS-13. During the Biden administration, the US State Department pressured Salvadoran authorities to extradite top MS-13 leaders jailed in El Salvador, and arrested a string of others embroiled in the terrorism case. But the return of López Larios suggests the US government may now be willing to sacrifice parts of its MS-13 investigation to facilitate mass deportations. It also raises questions about whether the Trump administration could use the 6 MS-13 leaders that remain in US custody as a bargaining chip to secure further deportations to El Salvador. This type of trade-off suits Bukele, whose government has stubbornly refused to extradite indicted MS-13 leaders. Many of them were privy to secret talks with top Bukele officials in which gang members offered to lower the country's homicide rate in exchange for prison benefits and protection from extradition, according to US prosecutors. That list includes Elmer Canales Rivera, alias Crook, a gang leader Salvadoran officials actually freed from jail. Crook was later arrested in Mexico and is now facing trial in New York. US prosecutors say Crook played one of the most prominent roles in the MS-13's negotiations and agreements with the Salvadoran government. The return of MS-13 leaders to El Salvador would almost certainly prevent the full details of those negotiations from coming to light. This was, could US deportations compromise the Trump administration's MS-13 crackdown? A story from Insight Crime's news desk. Published March 20th, 2025, written by me, Alex Papadavasilakis. For more audio stories, podcasts, and long-form narrative journalism, be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, and YouTube. And to read more of our coverage on organized crime in the Americas, go to insightcrime.org.